Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. Well, perhaps you've noticed the words fascism and authoritarianism. They're being used a lot in America at the moment. Now, the right says that fascism and authoritarianism are coming from the current administration. The left says that fascist, authoritarian threat is actually coming from Donald Trump and his loyalists within the Republican Party. David Frum, former speechwriter for George W. Bush and kind of a useful idiot for the Democratic Party, even wrote a piece in The Atlantic which shows the word fascism being spelled, and the headline says this: there is a word for what Trumpism is becoming. Now, the insinuation by Frum, of course, is that all 75 million Trump voters are fascists. So what is fascism? Since they love using it so much, we should probably define it. This is what easy Google search dictionary.com says, quote, a governmental system led by a dictator having complete power, forcibly suppressing opposition and criticism, regimenting all industry, commerce, etc., and emphasizing an aggressive nationalism and often racism, end quote. So that's fascism, complete government control, suppressing opposition, criticism, and controlling all industry, commerce. Nationalism and racism, they're often present in fascist regimes too. So I wanted to kind of ask some questions to see who fits this description presently, the Democrat or the Republican Party. Now, I bring this up because the latest idea for intrusion of government into your life is being talked about in Washington. The Biden administration is pressuring cell phone companies to let the government see and monitor your text messages, your SMS texts on your phone. From a Politico piece, it says, quote, Biden-allied groups, including the Democratic National Committee, are also planning to engage fact-checkers more aggressively and work with SMS carriers to dispel misinformation about vaccines that is sent over social media and text messages. The goal is to ensure that people who may have difficulty getting a vaccination because of issues like transportation see those barriers lessened or removed entirely, end quote. Okay, so back to the question at hand. Who are the fascists? Well, let's see. That definition that we read just a minute ago, that's one of the signs of fascism. One of it was that a government suppresses opposition and criticism. That's a sign. There's plenty of opposition and very legitimate concerns about getting the vaccine. We've talked endlessly about it. Does knowing that your texts are being monitored by the government suppress your opposition? It seems like it could definitely suppress opposition knowing that the government is spying on your texts. They say that it's to get the word out about vaccines. I mean, good heavens, who does anybody seriously not know that they can get these safe and effective vaccine now? Monitoring your private texts, that sounds like fascism to me. And who is the sponsor of this idea to monitor your texts? It's not Donald Trump. The Democrats. Yeah, you're right. Fascism is a government that has complete power. Now, I ask you, who controls nearly every institution in America? Whether it's the Senate, the House, corporations, the presidency, Hollywood, legacy media, legacy press, the military, the unions, the universities, now they even want to run the Supreme Court, all by leftist ideologues. Big tech, owned by the left. Big tech suppresses any speech that deviates from the big government line. Now, the former president of the United States isn't allowed to even speak on Facebook or Twitter. So again, I ask, who are the fascists? Is it Trump? Or is it Democrats who thought their unholy alliance with the private sector big tech and they're suppressing the former president's speech and a lot of ours and any speech they don't agree with? Who does that sound like to you? Maybe even you've been suppressed. Now, here's the point. You can't be the fascist threat if you're not in control and you don't have power. Trump can't even tweet. Republicans control almost nothing on the federal level. And by contrast, Democrats control everything. And now they want to see your private texts. I can't wait for them to see all the memes that I send. Once again, it's Democrats who are the authoritarian fascists by definition because they have managed to concentrate all of the power in America and then demand obedience. Now, back to the definition of fascism, it says that it is the regimenting, and that means the regulation of all energy and commerce. So who are the sponsors of regulation and legislation and all of this for the private sector? And I don't point out some anomaly, and I don't think anyone else should, where Republicans supported some regulation because the exceptions only prove the rule. Generally speaking, true Republicans lower corporate taxes and they remove regulations, they cut red tape, and that's why the authoritarians on the left hated Reagan. The Democrats, on the other hand, they pick winners and losers in the private sector and burden corporations and small businesses with endless regulations. And the proof was the blue states that crushed small businesses with very restrictive coronavirus measures. They picked winners and losers by designating some businesses and some people as essential and others as non-essential. Notice all the big corporate donors to Democrats were all considered essential, but not the mom and pop businesses, the 60% plus of the job creation. Many were destroyed. And if you need more proof, corporations are increasingly relocating to red states like Texas and Tennessee and Utah and South Carolina and Florida. They know where it's easier to do business because the government gets out of their way. So who are the fascist regulators of commerce? Seems pretty obvious at this point. Let's look at it. Democrats. Fascism is also defined by nationalism and racism. And this one is interesting because you might see all of those American flags Republicans wave and accuse them of some sort of misnomered ugly nationalism. And that's what Democrats do. They conflate nationalism and patriotism. Increasingly, love of country is defined as extremism and fascistic nationalism. But there is a difference between loving your country and celebrating it and ugly, just straight no chaser nationalism. Americans seem to be the only citizens in the world who cannot express love for country, according to the left. Now, in any case, fascism and authoritarianism are mainly about complete government control over individual citizenry. Now, the Democrats may not be nationalist per se, but they certainly are globalists, and the kind of government they seem to favor is a global one, completely removed from the people that empower it and united in one purpose: to control you. Case in point, Build Back Better. That was Joe Biden's campaign slogan. He still repeats it. Take a look at this video in which all of the world's leaders and leftist celebrities oddly repeat Joe Biden's slogan. Watch.
To build back better or whatever.
We have a chance to reset the clock and build back better than before.
To build back better than before.
Remember the terrible damage of COVID as we try to build back from this global pandemic.
Joe Biden calls it Build Back Better.
Build back better.
Building back better.
To do things differently. To build back better.
We're going to build it back better.
It's like all the Western governments are on script. Were we given drugs, honestly? Because that's what it feels like when you watch that video. It's really Orwellian. Democrats love also making stupid videos like that where they all say the same stupid thing and it's all kind of just disjointedly edited together. They love global government. And simultaneously, all over the world, we're seeing radical invasions of privacy, controls over movement and speech. Build back better, they all say. Is that fascism? Ask people all over the world who are being forced to get vaccinated, to travel, or to work. In France, for crying out loud, at this point, they've passed so many mandates. You can't be in the healthcare sector and not be unvaccinated. And now you have to have a vax pass to even go to restaurants, schools, or any public places. And the Democrats, they're attempting to do all of this right here in America. And the only thing stopping them is our form of government, which allows for states' rights. And everywhere there is a red state, you will find pushback on mandatory vaccinations, vax passes, masks on kids, travel restrictions, and stopping the government from invading your private texts to make sure that you aren't saying something that they don't like about vaccinations. Again, who are the fascists? Republicans resisting these impositions on personal autonomy, privacy, and freedom? No, it's Democrats. Finally, fascism is often characterized by racism. Which party today is disparaging an entire ethnicity on a daily basis? Which party says things like black people are oppressors and racists and black privilege and black fragility and saying blackness like it's a pejorative? Who is talking about the threat of, who says these things? Constantly views everything through race? Republicans? Trump voters? No. It's the Democrat Party. They say these things every day about white Americans and even white adjacent Americans. The substitute was to show you how despicable it is. Who's practicing and pushing critical race theory, a Marxist theory that institutionalized racism and teaches kids that they're oppressors and everyone has to view everything through the lens of race. And instead of identifying and rallying around freedom, they have to rally around ethnicity. Where is the anti-Semitic heartbeat beating in America? In the Republican Party? Or the Democrat Party, where you have Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and the anti-Semitic rhetoric oozing off campuses dominated by leftist Democrats. The Democrats have always been on the wrong side of history. And Democrats are on the wrong side of history today. They are the individuals that are trying to incorporate racism into every aspect of life. They match the definition of fascism to a T. So what's the size of David Fromm's crack rock here that he's smoking, calling Trump voters, which means 90% of Republicans, fascists? I mean, I get it. He wants to keep his job at the Atlantic as a token fake Republican. But that token fake Republicanism, that's pseudo-intellectualism. The fascist threat is not coming from Trump or Trump voters or Republicans. We all know where it's coming from. This administration. These fascists now, the current party, they used to not always be like this, but now they are. They want to look at your private texts now. They want to make sure that there's no wrong speak or wrong think in your private messages. You need to wake up, because today it's monitoring wrong speak about vaccinations. Tomorrow they'll be monitoring your text for something else. And when the Democrats do, they will do it in the name of, yes, stopping fascism. So coming up, what is the latest with Cuba and those fighting for freedom? Heritage Foundation's Mike Gonzalez joins me next to discuss. Keep it here. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company serving premium coffee to people who love America. Their founder, Evan Hafer, is a veteran, CEO, and he spent over 7 years on the ground overseas with U.S. Special Forces, and he also worked as a CIA contractor. Black Rifle Coffee is committed to Evan's mission of supporting veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. So this long summer, Black Rifle Coffee Company invites you to hook yourself up to an IV and just go ahead and inject their coffee right into your veins. I think I'm going to do that here shortly. Whether you're brewing the perfect cup of pour over or cracking open a can of 300 on your next backcountry mission, Black Rifle Coffee's here to fuel your way wherever summer takes you. So head on over to blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV and order yours. Use code DanaTV at checkout for 20% off your purchase and your first coffee club order. Fuel your summer with America's coffee, or else. Cuba is pushing back against communism, and a lot has transpired this week. It's been incredibly inspiring to watch, especially when you see people protesting and raising the American flag while shouting freedom. It's awesome. Mike Gonzalez is a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation and author of the book BLM, The Making of a New Marxist Revolution. It's out this September, and he's also a Cuban American, and he's here to give us the latest on Cuba's fight for freedom and also react to some of the administration's responses to press questions on all of this afternoon. Goodness, Mike, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a while.
Dana, it's been a long time. I'm glad to be on. I actually have breaking news. I didn't know that there would be breaking news on this. It just a Spanish newspaper, ABC, is reporting that the Vice Minister of the Interior has resigned in Cuba, questioning the excessive use of force. His name, I'm going to look it up here. This just came out. I just read this a half hour ago. Jesus Manuel Buron Cabot. And the Spanish newspaper also reports that there is dissension among the ranks between the old guard and the new generals. And this is the only way this can go well for the Cubans. There is no other way. I saw this in the Philippines with Marcos, when Fidel Ramos decided to, a Marcos general decided to go against him in 1986. And that was because if the military decides to suppress the people, then the people will suffer. And there will be another 60 years of tyranny. But if the military says, no, we're not going to shoot on our people, then this is the only way. For the first time in 3 days, I tell you, since this started, I have a little bit of hope.
Wow, and that is huge. And these demonstrations are so incredibly significant because they're throughout the entire country. This isn't just in one area. I mean, I don't know. I mean, this seems, from what I understand, this exceeds even the early 90s when that's when after days of demonstrations, Castro was opening up borders and saying, okay, well, you can go if you want to. We knew that wasn't going to happen with this case, but tell people a little bit just how significant this is and how different these demonstrations are from any other kind of protest we've seen before.
Well, this is the first time in 62 years of communist rule over the island. This is truly historic. We hear the word historic thrown around all the time. A football game in which the quarterback has 5 touchdowns is called historic. This is truly historic. In 1994, a good memory, by the way, the demonstrations that did take place were limited to Havana, was limited to the Malecon, which is the seaside boulevard. very well known. And then there were demonstrations also in 1980. Both those times, the Castro dictatorship responded with flotillas of refugees. It sent out its discontented. This time it happened in dozens of cities from one end of the country to the other. This time, people, they have a well-grounded fear. When you step out of line in Cuba, very bad things happen to you and happen to your family. So what happened, what these people did was very courageous. We should admire their courage. And I thought until a half hour ago, I saw no way this could end well. But if there's dissent among the troops, now that's just one newspaper report. But if it's true that there's dissent among the troops, then that's the only way the Cubans are going to have a fighting chance here.
Gosh, and it's amazing even to see something like that, because we've never even, not even from one newspaper, we're talking with Mike Gonzalez here about the latest with Cuba's demonstration, citizens' demonstration for freedom. I wanted to get your take too on what we heard from DHS Secretary Mayorkas earlier. He was asked about the protest and also about refugees who might want to seek asylum. And it was very interesting, his response, because he said, no, everyone needs to stay there. It's a little bit different from the administration's policy towards the United States southern border. And I had wondered, is this because that Cuban Americans tend to trend very, very conservative? I mean, they're a very natural fit with Constitution-loving Americans. And I saw a piece from Politico a couple of years ago that noted several different studies that said, Mike, that people when they come and immigrate to the United States, and Cubans in Florida since 2010, when they were tracking it, it was something like 76 to 5% that Republican over Democrat voter registrations. Do you think that plays a part in it?
Obviously, Dana, I've had this conversation many times in the last 3 days, or since Mallorca said this. The fact that Cubans, I think, voted for Trump 70-30, Cuban Americans in Miami, did that play a part? Since I don't have the divine powers to look into Alejandro Mayorkas' heart, I'm going to actually speak to what I think he should have done. I think he committed a grave error in addressing himself to Cubans. He should have addressed himself to the puppet leader of the country, Miguel Diaz-Canel, or actually the real power behind Miguel Diaz-Canel, which is the Castro family. And
we had a little bit of a glitch there with our guest, Mike Gonzalez, but we are back. We have him reestablished. And Mike, we were just discussing, I had asked you about DHS Mayorkas and his response to potential refugees or asylum seekers coming from Cuba. And it can be kind of difficult to see perhaps what someone is thinking, but I do think it's kind of a concern maybe for the administration. Florida is a very important state. The Cuban American community is super strong, super vocal, and very reliable Constitution voters. So there is a lot of speculation, as you are well aware. You've been discussing this, and I've seen you talking about this. There's a lot of speculation that, well, maybe let's not have all these asylum seekers from Cuba because it wouldn't be as advantageous politically. It's awful to think of things like that, but honestly, where does logic lead when we're not really given a lot of transparency into the discrepancy where it concerns immigration and asylum?
Yeah, it's obviously I have talked about it since Mallorca spoke. You have a very different policy. You have open borders. Basically, this is an open borders crisis that was created by Biden. And then Mallorca addresses himself to Cubans and says, no, please don't even think about taking to the high seas. I think that was actually a very strategic error by Mayorkas. Mayorkas should be talking to the puppet dictator of Cuba, Miguel Diaz-Canel, or to the power behind Miguel Diaz-Canel, which is the Castro family, and say to them in no uncertain terms, do not even think of resorting to what you have done in the past, what you did in 1994, and what you did in 1980, which is to banish your discontented, to banish your opposition, and send them to the high seas in flotillas. We will not take kindly to this, and you will pay a price for it. So he really should. He's talking to the wrong people. He should talk to the government of Cuba, not to the Cuban people.
Right. That's a very, very good point. Mike, how does the United States help? Because there seems to, I mean, it seems that saying that you stand with the people who are protesting isn't enough. However, I do understand the concerns and agree with those who say, well, maybe we shouldn't go so far as the Miami mayor and say we should send troops in, because, you know, obviously that creates a very unstable situation in that part of the world. But where between those 2 points, how can the United States help, aside from maybe sending a ship right down there to the beginning boundary in the waters of Cuba so that we can establish a Wi-Fi signal if the Cuban government decides to turn it off and people can't get out information anymore? Where do you see the United States and how best being able to help the protest movement?
Well, actually, Dana, that's a very good idea, helping them with Wi-Fi. You know, I think that a very strong denunciation of the Castro dictatorship, of communism, and of the very harsh, brutal reaction against the demonstrators that we have seen since Sunday night, in which average Cubans, men and women, are being dragged out of their houses, being beaten up. We're seeing this on social media. I think that goes a very long way. That's not just talking. We know from Natan Sharansky and the other Soviet refuseniks. Obviously, Natan Sharansky now is in Israel. He's an activist, but he talks about how when he was in the Gulag in the mid '80s, it came to him, because these things are always eventually known, that the president of the United States, a man named Ronald Reagan, had denounced the Soviet Union as the evil empire and has spoken on behalf of the dissidents. And that meant a lot to him. He said that nourished his soul. It affirmed that what he was doing is right. He was able to continue his sacrifice in the Gulag, knowing that there was a power overseas, the superpower of the United States, and a president who had taken the side of the victims of communism. So I think that we cannot discount what having Biden come out and give a very strong statement. They're very unlike what he's done. He has not really been strong. We can discuss why he has not been strong. But if Biden has at all an inner Ronald Reagan, and that's a very big if, I understand. But if he has an inner Ronald Reagan, now is the time to channel it. Now is the time for Biden to have a tear down this wall moment. This is an enormous opportunity for him if he's there to seize it. We obviously can surmise that, as with everything else, he's deathly afraid of the left flank of his own party, of the likes of Bernie Sanders or the squad of Black Lives Matter, institutions of the left that have always embraced Cuban communism, and for that matter, the Congressional Black Caucus, which is really a very criminally supported the Castro dictatorship, which is, if you want to talk about white supremacy, that is white supremacy. Miguel Diaz-Canel is a blue-eyed white descendant of Spaniards. The vast majority of the people demonstrating are actually Black Cubans or mixed race Cubans, as we can see in the demonstrations. This is a very clear moment for Biden, for him to reach it. He would be sending a very strong signal. But then the most important thing, Dana, and I know you're going to agree with this, is for us to remain free ourselves. We cannot help anybody. We cannot help the Cubans. We cannot help anyone if we don't remain free ourselves, free of Marxism. And this is why I'm so optimistic here in the United States. Americans are waking up from coast to coast, rising up. Parents are saying, no, you're not going to teach these ugly things to our children. No, you're not going to harass us work with critical race theory. And even though these proponents of these disciplines are trying to gaslight Americans and say, this is not critical race theory, I assure you it is. I study critical race theory. I know what it is about. Ultimately, the best thing we can do to remain a beacon of hope for the rest of the world is to remain free ourselves.
Yes, I agree. And we're going to be talking about CRT here coming up. Mike, last question for you, because I know your background and I know your family came from Cuba. And I'm curious, you're hopeful. I think we're all hopeful. But at the same time, I mean, this obviously carries a significance for you. and watching the number of people in the street. And as you had cited, one of the Spanish language newspapers discussing how someone, military official, just a little earlier was saying that they resigning their position, they weren't going to take up against the citizenry. The potential here with a free Cuba. Talk about what that means to you.
Well, what it means to me is that the snakehead of evil in the Western Hemisphere will be removed. Once Cuba is free, Venezuela will become free, and Nicaragua will become free, and the free societies of Chile and Colombia and Ecuador will not be destabilized. Cuba is the fountainhead of evil in the Western Hemisphere. It has thwarted American attempts at establishing a zone of freedom and liberty in the Western Hemisphere. So this will not only mean that the 11 million Cubans will be able to have a chance at rejoicing in the blessings of liberty, but a lot of other people in the hemisphere will also be able to have a chance at leading normal lives.
Yes, absolutely. We'd love to see it, and we'd love to go there and also celebrate free Cuba. It'd be a wonderful thing to see. Mike Gonzalez, appreciate you, and I know you're going to be busy in the days to come, and we hope that there's more good news that comes out of Cuba. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Thank you, Dana. Thanks. Bye.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So coming up on Critical Race Theory, the fight for education against it is still just getting started. Remember, this really only began this spring. Robin Steenman from Moms for Liberty joins me next to discuss a new twist that a lot of parents may not even be aware of that's also happening in their schools. Keep it here. The teachings of critical race theory, they're getting a lot of pushback by parents all over the country because you had the lockdown, and then parents started seeing, as class was taking place in their kitchens and living rooms, they started seeing exactly what their kids were being taught. And now you have this momentum all across the nation. So my next guest says that there's also a new twist that's happening in schools that many parents likely do not even know about yet, and that could do even more harm. Social emotion learning. Robin Steenman is the Williamson County chapter. She's the chair of Moms for Liberty. She joins me now to break all of this down. Robin, thanks for being here. So tell us all about social emotional learning, because this is basically, from what I understand, just like another means through which to present information that doesn't have anything to do with academic growth to kids.
Right. Well, we started looking into our curriculum with suspicions of CRT. We had a child that suddenly was ashamed to be half white, ashamed of his white father. So we started to look into our curriculum, which is called Wit and Wisdom, and we found pockets of CRT there. But what we really found was that it was end-to-end social emotional learning. And some of you might recognize the catchphrases, teaching your child how to cope with feelings, manage emotions, develop identities, to feel and show empathy. That's social emotional learning. And whether or not you want public school to teach your child about that is up to you. But we found in our curriculum that there were just these common threads that were age inappropriate, that were extremely dark, that they're designed to elicit an emotional response from children. Suicide ideation occurs in first, third, fourth, and fifth grade. Now, think about your first grade, 6, 7-year-old learning about, suicide. And then again in the third grade, another common thread is bad white people, extreme emotion, cannibalism, anti-nuclear family, dark imagery throughout, graphic death, anti-America, and age-inappropriate topics.
That sounds like, it feels like I'm hearing about a review of Saw as opposed to, actual curriculum for elementary school kids. And that's the other terrifying thing. 7-year-olds are learning, basic concrete concepts, not abstract ideas and political science theory. This has nothing to do with education. How this is abusive.
Yes. Well, they start in kindergarten. When we say age inappropriate topics, that runs the gamut. In kindergarten, they're introduced to murder. In the first grade, they have graphic mating and the soft intro to gender fluidity. In the second grade, anti-police, anti-fire department. In the third grade, it's highly anti-church, torture.
Anti-fire department. I mean, that, like they're, who's rooting for the fire at that point? Oh my gosh. But this is really about reconditioning, not just about kids learning, but how they view the world and reconditioning them to reprogram for relationships, family. I mean, this is like a behavioral conditioning for, as you just said, the nuclear family as well, and their place in society.
Well, even in the 4th grade, you've got rape, murder, adultery, scalping and skinning of your human victims, stillbirth. In the 5th grade, you have gore, excessive violence, alcoholism, and promiscuity. Again, these are elementary age children. And you're indoctrinating them into this dark, dark world of depressing content and hopelessness, and it is affecting them psychologically. We have kids in therapy over this. We have families that are broken over this and are having to deal with picking up the pieces of, well, suddenly, a little boy is ashamed of his white father. Suddenly a 7-year-old girl comes home and asks why everybody hates her. Another 1st grader is ashamed of her white family and her grandparents and has had suicidal thoughts about it. I mean, these are young, impressionable, defenseless minds that are being just bombarded day after day from August to May, the whole school year. They find these books. They're just dark and emotionally charged, and each book has 20 lessons, up to 20 lessons that can spiral around it. So, you pick one book and day after day, well, you're going to learn grammar from this book. You're going to learn adjectives, adverbs, sentence expansion, narrative expansion.
Skinning.
Yeah.
I mean, good grief. I mean, I don't mean to make light of it, but this is how ridiculous that this desire and this intent to really brainwash kids. I mean, ultimately that's what it is, and to shame them into what these cultural Marxists, for the lack of a better way to put it, their idea of how kids should see the world through their activist eyes, and they're trying to transpose this into education. Tell me this, because I'm looking at, I have in some of my prep, Robin, just some statistics about sadly teenager suicide, depression with kids. We saw this during the lockdown, and obviously the first thought is to think, well, everybody's been locked down it was supposed to be 15 days and it ended up being for an entire year or more. And kids were not able to regularly go to school, have athletics, and even go through those major milestones in life that they use to define their adulthood later in life, whether it's homecoming, prom, major games. But with this education, this curriculum that is being fed to them, I'm curious as to your thoughts on how much that also plays into the depression rates and the suicide rates, not just from staying at home, but also being fed that kind of material day in and day out by an educational institution that they are told they can expect to care about them.
Well, I think what the aim, the end goal of this type of curriculum is an emotional thinker. Because if you examine the left, they are against objective truth. Everything is subjective. And if you learn to view your world through, well, I feel this way about something, so it must be right. If you gauge everything on emotion, well, emotion's never wrong. Emotion just is what it is. So you lose logic and ration and scientific reasoning and objective truth. And you marry that up, you take a child from the kindergarten all the way up to high school. And then for the Biden administration, they want to introduce action civics. Well, what is action civics? It's how to protest. It's not, going to your congressman and, or woman and voicing your concerns. It's taking to the streets and yelling with a bullhorn or worse. And you've had a child from kindergarten on, it's just feelings. And then this is how you protest. And that's how you burn down a whole country.
Yeah, it's the new next generation Antifa, training little Antifa Junior. That's kind of, ultimately that's what they're doing. And then of course when you feed children that sort of material all the way from K up through their senior year in high school, yeah, you're going to have some pretty angry I mean, they're feeling feelings, but they're going to be some angry feelings and some rage, and that's not good for anyone, as we saw not just with suicide and depression, but also with the destruction that we've seen.
And in this curriculum, it's all negative emotion. There's no happiness, no joy. It's anger, rage, fury, sadness. You know, with the suicide ideation, the character says, well, why not just end it now? It'd be so much easier. It is all just negative, dark emotion.
That's and that's a very good point as well. Not even focusing on anything good, not even countering that with anything to celebrate or discussing joy. That's just, Robin, let me ask you this. How did, when you all first started seeing this, and obviously so many parents began paying attention to this because lockdowns made everyone stay home. Did you have a talk with your kids? What did you hear from other parents and kids in your district?
We have at least 7 parent testimonies that have just talked about the kids' demeanor just changed. It became more depressed, more dejected. The one parent, they kind of to dig a little bit to find out that, well, he's ashamed of his white father or ashamed to be an American.
And
there's
tracing this to the material in school.
Well, a most recent testimonial was her daughter felt like, well, she noticed a change in her children. She pulled them out of school and they didn't talk about it. Because, I mean, a lot of kids, they won't bring it home and talk to you about what they've learned. So the kids didn't say anything. And then they actually attended a recent school board meeting and they saw us talk about the curriculum, and the kids opened up after that on the way home. And she confided to her mother that being in public school and learning this curriculum, she felt like she couldn't feel God anymore. And in the 3rd grade, they have like 20 lessons that are anti-church, supposedly about Galileo, but it doesn't really focus on Galileo's amazing accomplishments. It focuses on church persecution. And so now that she's been out of the school for a period of time, she says she can feel God again. Now, if you're,
I mean, that's a heavy thing for a kid to say.
Yeah, I mean, and kids are so perceptive, and they put things in the simplest of terms that, you know, we over rationalize and overthink. But that simple phrase, I don't want to be an American and I can't feel God, then there's really no question what the curriculum is doing. You know, people argue the semantics. Oh, it's subtle. It's, you know, it's not really there. It's all in your imagination. But when a child says that, it's real.
Yeah, when a child says it, and when you have teachers unions actually put it up on their website that they're teaching these principles and this as academic instruction, and they're defending it on television and in editorials, yeah, it's absolutely real. Robin, last question for you. What should other parents look out for? Because everyone now, I mean, and obviously this SEL is a component, it's a tool for CRT because you have to condition the mind in order to be able to do the rest. What do parents need to be watching out for? I mean, I think every parent obviously should be looking at their kid's curriculum. I don't care how old the child is, but what should they be looking for in particular? Something that would maybe not so obvious that would tip them off.
Well, 2 points. I do think CRT is the capstone on SEL, and SEL is the true belly of the beast. So even if we're successful in prying the capstone off the top of it, then you still have to go after SEL. You still have to address that. And things to look out for is don't deny your parental instincts. I hear a lot of teachers know best. The teacher's in charge of, you know, teaching your student about values and even religion. But no, we don't co-parent with teachers. It's the parent that knows their child better than anyone in this world. And if you sense something that's not right with your child, or if you read a book and that's not right, you could just feel it in your gut, don't discount that. Don't think that, oh, you're not an educator, you don't know. You are the parent. And Moms for Liberty is about reasserting parental rights. It's about informing and empowering the parents, and parents have to take that back in the defense of their children, or their children are going to be damaged by this curriculum. This curriculum actually, in the long term, drives a wedge between the parent and the child. So you've got to stand up now and listen to your gut.
Robin Steenman, so appreciate your advocacy, not just on behalf of kids in your district, but also just waking up parents across the rest of the country. Thank you so much. And everybody should obviously be checking their kids' curriculum. Thank you. All right, folks, close down the water lanes because, of course, you've seen the headlines. Cubans fleeing persecution. Of course, who wouldn't? I mean, you can either choose to go into the high seas or perhaps get murdered by your government. But, fleeing persecution, can't have that. Why is that? Because when you look at the statistics of how Cuban Americans vote, they overwhelmingly vote Republican. You're not going to believe this. Is this the motivating factor, perhaps, behind the administration's decision to not accept refugees or asylum seekers? Stay with us. So, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Ali Mayorkas has this to say to Cubans who might get into a boat to try to make it to America to flee persecution.
The time is never right to attempt migration by sea. To those who risk their lives doing so, this risk is not worth taking. Allow me to be clear. If you take to the sea, you will not come to the United States.
I think the folks on the Mayflower might beg to differ, right? Because you wouldn't have America if no one risked a journey over water to political and religious freedom. It's really kind of hard, though, to believe that Mayorkas just said this because Democrats are the same people who fought building a wall along the southern border at every step. They refused to allow ICE to deport everyone. In fact, they would prefer under the Clinton administration to send people in with full auto to go and get people like Elian Gonzalez out of a closet. Yeah, they wouldn't even deport repeated criminals during the Trump administration. And do you remember when Democrat mayors warned criminals in Oakland, criminals, like violent criminals, that ICE was about to do a raid? This is the sanctuary city Democrats. They want people who enter the country illegally and never bother to actually start the process of becoming a citizen. They want to give them full rights just outright without even applying and give them voting everything. But hey, Cuban refugees, you're going to have to dock that boat somewhere else because apparently there's a new litmus test for people seeking asylum coming to America. Give us your tired and your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. That now comes with an asterisk, as long as you're not a Republican. It's kind of obvious, and it's incredibly obvious. I mean, let's be real. Cubans are natural conservatives. This is what happens when you live under a totalitarian regime for 60 years. It's a living hell. You're so much so that you're willing to board a leaky fishing boat for a chance to make it to American shores. You're going to take your chances on the high seas as opposed to with your government. And if you survive the heat and the currents and the sharks, there's still something standing in your way, according to DHS Secretary Mayorkas. And what is that? Democrats who don't want you there. The same Democrats who continue to let a flood of people in caravans pour over the borders, and they talk about things like right of asylum because they say they're fleeing persecution or global warming, whatever it is. That's kind of a funny one. But Cuban people who've been protesting with American flags, fresh out of, watching people get mowed down by their own government, who will be killed or imprisoned by the communist regime. No room for them? Can't have them voting for Ron DeSantis or Trump, so off you go. Good luck in Haiti or Cuba when they send you back. Now, it's worth pointing out that we wouldn't even have a border crisis if Democrats had thought for 2 seconds that Republicans were pouring over the border. Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Joe Biden they'd have put their dickies on already. And for Hillary, it would have been a pantsuit, and grabbed the cement concrete, and they would have immediately started putting up the 2x4s and building the wall themselves, and fast. So it's never about what Democrats say, it's about what they do. Their actions really, they don't believe in helping people. They believe in changing the demographics of America, where really their party. They just want people to vote Democrat. Let's be honest about this. And the moment that anybody who immigrates to the United States, the moment that they prove conservative or registered Republican, that's when, just like Democrats discovered in 2016 and in 2020 with Cuban Americans in Florida and voting, right? And that's also because there was a lot of outreach in the community and people also had the experience of living with tyranny. So you can't have the diversity of the diversity-loving Democrat Party unless you vote a certain way? Here's something else to note. There have been numerous studies, and several of them have noted that Cuban Americans who have been immigrating to the United States since 2010 have overwhelmingly been voting Republican. In fact, one of the latest, it's 76% Cuban Americans voting Republican. It is a natural fit, a complete natural fit. And this is one of the reasons why Florida went the way it did in 2016, one of the reasons why Florida went the way it did in 2020. In fact, I think that it's safe to say, and there's speculation on this, that Mayorkas' stance is sort of also kind of waving a white flag of surrender, and that Democrats don't even think that Florida can be a swing state anymore. Because you have to go back again to 2020. You didn't have Biden and the Democrat operation going down to Cuban American neighborhoods in Florida and campaigning. You didn't have any of that door-to-door outreach or evangelism in 2016, even before there was a lockdown and a pandemic. So, and they're very vocal. So it's a natural fit. And it's the great American story. There's a very interesting, different treatment there. As I said on radio today, America is where people come not organized around a race, not organized around one particular identity, not organized around a language, an ethnicity, a gender, or anything else, but organized around one identifying factor. Do you like being free? That is the identity of Americans. And when people immigrate to America or they're born here, your DNA is stamped, do you love freedom, yes or no? That's the determining factor. But that's one that a party that seeks control doesn't want to acknowledge. That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.